Hello, my name is Ethan Child, and today I will be talking about Taxi Driver. I believe Taxi Driver to be Martin Scorsese's greatest film, and it's also one of his most defining films, especially from so early in his career. Taxi Driver features a screenplay by Paul Schrader, cinematography by Michael Chapman, and a score by Bernard Herrmann. This actually ended up being Herrmann's last film score. Taxi Driver is not a movie about New York City. So many films that are set in New York City are said to be love stories to New York, or movies that are made for New Yorkers, or movies that New Yorkers can relate to. This is not that by any means. Taxi Driver is not about New York City. Rather, it's about every city, everywhere. And it's not about a taxi driver, it's about everyone. It's about everyone and everything. And he's just showing you a very specific story that can relate to so many places. New York City is not very distinct in this movie. The setting is just sort of this limbo that we've entered into, which I really think is what Scorsese and Schrader were hoping to achieve with their collaboration. Taxi Driver starts out as a love story, but then gradually descends into this disturbing, terrifying nightmare that brutally explores deep humanity. The movie brings us one of the greatest character studies in all of cinema history, as well as one of the greatest characters in cinema history, that in the character study of Travis Bickle. We are made earlier in the movie to feel Travis's pain. We relate to his loneliness. Travis Bickle has no one in the world, and he just wants to find someone who will understand him. And we can all relate to that, and that's what makes it so disturbing when we witness his sort of mental decline and breakdown. It's in that sense that he is the ultimate anti-hero. Like many of Scorsese's characters, he's very, very relatable, but he's also very violent, he's hateful, and he's even racist, as suggested by his long glances at certain black characters in the movie, which were shown, and were actually shown from his perspective, those black characters. This idea, this theme of seeing the story through Travis's point of view, is reinstated when we are shown certain slow motion shots. In 1976, when the movie was released, audiences were used to seeing slow motion shots in love stories. You have the stereotypical image of, two lovers running from opposite sides of a beach in slow motion. That sort of thing. That's what we were used to with slow motion. It's done here, but the slow motion is used here in a very, very different way, in a way that, as far as I'm aware, had never been used before. Scorsese shows outside on the streets of New York City, he shows them in slow motion. And we're seeing that from Travis Bickle's point of view. We're seeing the slow motion of different city street scenes, of dirty hookers and pimps walking the streets. And I think the reason we're shown this in slow motion is because that's how Travis sees it. Travis sees it in slow motion. This fast-moving world, as it goes speeding by his taxi cab, he sees every little detail. It's all those little details that everyone else overlooks, but that Travis just can't get over. It's this disgusting underworld that everyone just sort of accepts to ignore, except Travis. Travis sees it for what it really is, and he loathes it. He views it very hatefully, and it's what causes him to have such a hateful, cynical view of the world. We most frequently see the streets in the movie, we most frequently see them viewed from inside the taxicab, or at least on the taxicab, very cleverly mounted on the outside of the taxicab. This would suggest that we're viewing the world from, we are viewing the world from inside the taxi, but it would suggest that we're viewing it from Travis's point of view, which might also suggest that we aren't seeing reality as it is. We might see an exaggerated version of reality. That's how Travis perceives it. This immediately suggests a dreamlike theme, which I think is really what Scorsese and Schrader were going for with this movie. One wouldn't exactly automatically associate the word dreamlike or fantasy with a movie that's so violent and disturbing, but I think that's really what they wanted to suggest. They want to suggest the dreamlike, or should I say nightmarish, visions that Travis has of the city life. And I think this sort of fantasy and nightmare is suggested right from the opening credits, when we have that smoky look, which is the cliche used to hint at a dream sequence, but it's used very cleverly here to enter us into this world of nightmares and into this world of false perceptions that we're seeing. I would call Travis Bickle the Norman Bates of the 1970s. Both of those characters, Norman Bates and then later Travis Bickle, were both criminals and they were both anti-heroes. And we are both shown the world, in both cases, we're shown the world through their point of view, and we can relate to them. For example, in Psycho, after the shower scene, after the murder, when Norman is shown to be cleaning up, we feel very bad for him, and we feel very bad about his whole relation with his mother. Taxi Driver, much like Psycho, has hints of film noir. Aside from just showing crime in a very highly stylized way, it also exposes us, the audience, to a very underground element of crime, which is something I think that is the essential element of film noir. It's showing us something that everyone is aware of, but that we all choose to ignore almost. We're shown this sort of underground world through the eyes of a very cynical, pessimistic, almost sadistic character, which again would lend to the film noir element. We can almost immediately see that the character of Travis Bickle is very out of touch with humanity. We can see this in his simple mannerisms, in his attempts to carry a conversation he simply cannot. We can guess as a character who has been through some traumatic situations and who spends a lot of time alone. This is perhaps best shown in the movie when he takes Betsy, played by Sybil Shepherd, to a pornographic movie house. This shows that he has absolutely no idea of what is socially acceptable and unacceptable. His telephone attempts to try to get Betsy to forgive him and to try to speak to Betsy again, we really feel bad for Travis. Because he does have that human element. He has a human element, the desire to be loved and the desire to be accepted. But in turn, he also has the inability to be accepted because he's so inhuman. Taxi Driver is also about a man's mental decline. It's very cleverly shown through the cinematography, which in the beginning, again right from the opening credits, is shown to be very glossy, very smooth, but then slowly gets grittier and grittier. It's also geniusly shown through the score by Bernard Herrmann, which I'm not sure if this element of the score is something that Herrmann contributed or that someone else did in post-production, but it is one of my most favorite moments in the movie. It's right at the end. It's when the score, it almost does that sort of backwards track type sound right at the end as he's riding away. Travis is riding away, looking in the rearview mirror. There's this reverse type sound, and it almost sounds like there's something gone wrong with the film score. I'll come back to that later. I have a little bit more that I want to say about that particular moment. I think the most disturbing moment in the entire film is when we are first given the shot of Travis with his new haircut, of the mohawk going up the middle of his head. I think it's so scary because that is a moment where we can see how inhuman he has become. We have seen this man who could barely hold the conversation but still had that desire to be human, who has now gone through an attempt to make himself completely inhuman, almost like an animal. This detail of the haircut was a suggestion from an actor in the movie, Victor Magnotta, who played the Secret Service agent. Magnotta had served in Vietnam, and he told Scorsese that soldiers in Vietnam who were going to the jungle would cut their hair, and that would signify that they were going on a sort of commando mission. That's reflected here, because soldiers going into the jungle in Vietnam would cut their hair like that, and now we're seeing De Niro as Bickle cutting his hair like that, and it's showing that he's going on this mission, except his jungle, instead of a jungle of Vietnam, his jungle is a city in New York. He's going into an unexplored territory. One thing that I simply must talk about in this review is something that has been the subject of much controversy, and that is the very ending of the movie. My belief is very definitely that the ending is purely fantasy. It is a dream of Travis. I believe the ending to be Travis's vision or dream in his very dying moments. I do not believe that he survives the shootout towards the end of the movie. We see Travis being hailed as a hero, and we listen to a letter written by Iris's father that thanks him for the heroic deed that he did. I don't know how likely it is that something like that would happen. Now, I know that whether or not something is actually happening in a story shouldn't be based on how likely it is, because frequently stories are very unlikely. But I think the movie suggests that that ending will not happen. It's sort of, to continue with the anti-hero theme, he can't be hailed as a hero. Travis wants to be perceived, and he might even believe that's how he's going to be perceived. But that perception, as we've been learning throughout the entire movie, Travis's perceptions are not in touch with humanity and do not align with how he will be perceived, clearly. In the taxicab in the end of the movie, which I would even go so far as to call Travis's dream portal, Betsy gets in, and we then learn that he has decided to let go of Betsy. He's finally let go of Betsy, this woman who he's been dreaming of for so long and loving since he first saw her. He has now been put at this new level that he believes is above her, and she even shows signs of admiring him. This is, in a way, Travis's dying wish, the people who couldn't accept him finally deeming him as a hero. Now, the fantasy element is very heavily hinted at in the detail that I mentioned earlier with the score. That reverse track, you can't listen to that and say there isn't anything wrong here. Because that fantasy sort of suggests a happy ending, or as happy an ending could be to this movie. It suggests that everything is okay, that ending, but then, except for that little moment where he looks in the rear view mirror, and there's that little skip up of the score. I don't know quite how it was done, but it sounds like almost a reversing track type thing. I think that suggests something is not right here, and I think that is the key element, the smoking gun to the heavily controversial fantasy ending theory. I believe that Scorsese would proceed to more obviously use this fantasy ending concept in 1982 with The King of Comedy, but we won't discuss that now. Taxi Driver features some of the best acting performances of all time, particularly, in my opinion, Robert De Niro in his best performance, in my opinion. Robert De Niro is responsible for much of the disturbingness of the movie. He makes a character in the beginning who is slightly off, but also very relatable, which is partly because of the writing, because he's in a very relatable situation, but also because De Niro has created a character that is so believable and very human. But those minor flaws that are what make him human become the flaws that make him inhuman, and that's what scares us. We can see some of those similar traits in ourselves, and it puts that thought in your head of, this could happen to me. Obviously, it really couldn't. You would need to be mentally insane. But thinking like that is what really scares me and disturbs me about this movie. How the scary things that Travis did are so awful and so terrible, but they're also very human. They come from human desires, and they come from human qualities, and they come from human faults that we can all see in ourselves. Harvey Keitel appears as Sport in his fourth film with Scorsese, and it marks another great collaboration between the two geniuses. Keitel created a character that I don't really think anyone else could have. It was a very deep character in a role that could have been very passive. Keitel creates a non-anonymous face amongst the sea of anonymous faces that Travis sees. This reminds us that all those people that Travis so openly loathes are all human individuals with the same human faults that Travis has, and that we, the audience, have. And of course, the most notable performance in the movie is Jodie Foster's as Iris, or Easy as Sport calls her. This was a very ambitious performance, as Foster was only 13, I believe. She's only 13, 12 or 13 at the time of shooting. His presence in the movie as a minor made the whole thing just much more believable. But it couldn't have been just any youngster. I think it had to be Foster to be so good. Foster clearly had an understanding of what Scorsese wanted to do, and she does so great a job in the movie. She creates a character that is very human, and that's what Taxi Driver is all about. It's all about human characters with the same faults and how they interact. That concludes my review for Taxi Driver. I cannot suggest this movie enough. It's one of my all-time favorites, and it is, in my opinion, Scorsese's best. I hope that if you see it, or if you have seen it, that you enjoy it as much as I do. Thank you for watching.